C'est maintenant le temps de passer à la conférence d'ouverture de ce symposium. Depuis plusieurs années, le Réseau des donateurs pour la paix est un fier partenaire de PrevNet, le réseau pour la promotion de relations saines et l'élimination de la violence. C'est un gros mandat. Cette année, nous avons demandé à Mme Wendy Craig, qui est assise... Ah, voilà. Peut-être trop proche. Co-directrice et cofondatrice de PrevNet, de donner la conférence d'ouverture. Mme Craig est professeure à l'Université Queen's à Kingston, en Ontario. Elle est l'une des chefs de file au Canada dans la recherche en matière de prévention de l'intimidation. Depuis plus de 25 ans, Mme Craig examine les enjeux liés à l'intimidation du point de vue de la psychopathologie de développement. Elle est l'auteure de plus de 100 articles scientifiques, 33 chapitres de livres et 4 ouvrages. Je pense qu'elle a quelque chose à dire. Lors de cette présentation, Mme Craig examinera comment les relations influent sur la santé mentale et le bien-être des enfants. Elle discutera des approches qui fonctionnent et celles qui ne fonctionnent pas, de même que des outils fondés sur des données probantes, lesquels peuvent soutenir le développement des relations saines. Je vais donc maintenant accueillir Mme Wendy Craig.
Okay, I have to bring up mine.
I think he's supposed to change.
Bonjour. J'attends les slides. Je m'excuse parce que je parle en anglais parce que mon français, ce n'est pas bien. So.
I think he's coming here.
Okay. Thank you for coming today. I'm going to start with the message in case, because I'm an academic, you get tired by the end and want to have a nap. So my next slide is going to tell you the most important thing that you need to remember, which is relationships matter. When we address bullying and victimization, bullying is a relationship problem that requires relationship solutions. In a recent meta-analysis where they put all the studies that had ever been done looking at how outcomes were related to healthy relationships, they had over 310,000 subjects that had been followed for 7.5 years. And what they found was that if you had inadequate social relationships, it decreased your risk of early mortality by 50%. So relationships matter. Not only do they matter like that, that's a bigger relationship than it is for early risk factors associated with obesity or being overweight for early mortality. So you think about all the attention that we give to these very important issues like being overweight, being physically active, but relationships are actually, and having adequate relationships are actually a bigger risk factor for early mortality. So I want you to think about today how we do in relationships in Canada. We recently did a study with about 28,000 children across the country, and we asked them about the quality of their relationships. And as you're looking at this graph, you see grades 6 to 10, and the girls are in red and the boys are in blue. And what you see is these are the percentage of children that are reporting having a high-quality relationship with their parents. You should be shocked. In grade 6, it's only about 40%, and by grade 10, it goes down to about 20%. So not many children are reporting that they are experiencing a high quality of relationships. And let me give you an example about how relationships matter. This looks at the relationship between emotional problems and relationship with parents. So from here you can see that the boys are on one side and the girls are on the other. And the blue bar represents those children who reported having a poor relationship with their parents. 70% of girls who reported having a poor relationship with their parents had emotional problems. These aren't clinical levels, but they're subclinical levels. 53% of boys who had a poor relationship with their parents reported having emotional problems, versus 11% of boys and 16% of girls who had a high-quality relationship that had emotional problems. How do we do? Sorry, I went the wrong way. How do we do in terms of teachers? We ask similar questions. That my teacher knows me. My teacher is someone that I can talk to. My teacher is someone that I can share my problems. My teacher understands me. Here you can see it's the same graph. This is the percentage of children that are reporting a high-quality relationship with their teacher. In grade 6, it's about 52% of girls and about 44% of boys. By the time you get to grade 10, it's about 18 and 17% of girls and boys. So it's that same decrease. As children develop, fewer of them are reporting a high-quality relationship with teachers and parents. What's interesting here is many of them early on report a high-quality relationship. How do relationship with teachers matter in terms of emotional well-being? I wanted to show you that relationships matter in terms of having behavior problems, or the quality of relationship matters in terms of promoting well-being. So 58% of boys and 46% of girls who had a high-quality relationship with their teacher reported emotional well-being. So having a high-quality relationship with your teacher, taking the time to get to know children matters. Let me give you an example. This conference is about tools, so let me give you my first tool related to this. That one of the things that we've done is we did a small study where we had teachers spend 10 minutes every month one-on-one with each child in their classroom. And we asked them at the beginning of the year and the end of the year how kids felt about their relationship, their level of safety, their level of respect, and it went up significantly from the beginning to the end of the year. When teachers spent that 10 minutes one-on-one, at first the children were like, what did I do wrong? But then they came to understand that the teacher was spending time just talking about what interests them, what they were doing, if they were involved in competitive swimming, how it was going. And that very act of getting to know them and spending that one-on-one time actually increased their quality of relationship and their sense of safety and their sense of belonging to that school. So 10 minutes a month with each student, one-on-one, made a difference. That's your first tool. We also asked about quality of relationships with peers, and this quite shocked me. It's the same graph, only it's about the quality of relationships with peers. And what you can see here is about 32% of boys and 35% of girls in grade 6 report having a high quality relationship with their peers. It goes down to 12 and 13% by grade 10. So not many, as children develop, fewer and fewer of them are experiencing a high quality of relationships with their teacher, with their parents, or with their peers. And how did that relate to emotional problems? Here you go. 36% of boys and 54% of girls who had poor quality relationships were more likely to report emotional problems. And that's controlling for all the effects of all of the other different relationships. These are the unique effects of having high quality relationships. Okay, now I'm gonna I did figure it out. So why do relationships matter? I gave you the example of the teachers and how it matters. I'm gonna give you an example about how it matters in terms of protecting against being cyber victimized. So this is a paper that I did with Frank Elger at McGill University, and one of the things that you can see here is it's about relationship connections at dinners and how it relates to being cyber victimized. As you're looking at the graph, 7 represents the number of family dinners, and it goes all the way down to 0. So this is how often you how many times a week do you have dinner with your family? At the top, and as you're looking at it on your left, this is about internalizing problems, externalizing problems, substance abuse, and total problems. What do you take from this very confusing academic graph? Let me tell you. We at least are honest about our way that we present. What this looks at is how often that you've been victimized. So the white bars are kids who have never been victimized, then it's rarely, then sometimes, and the solid bars are those kids who have report being cyber victimized often. What this shows you is having dinner with your family protects you against the effects of being cyber victimized. So if we just look at the top graph, for example, you can tell that if you have dinner with your family about 5 times a week, the effects of being cyber victimized, and it doesn't matter how often it happens, but you're protected against for developing internalizing problems like anxiety and depression. The same is true if you look at having externalizing problems. So if you look at the far, those who never have dinner with their family, there's a huge effect of how often you get victimized determines the effect of being, of how likely you are to have externalizing problems. The point here is spending time with your family can buffer the negative effects associated with cyber victimization. On average in Canada, the amount of time for dinner is 19 minutes. It doesn't take long every day to have dinner and buffer your child from the effects of being cyber victimized. Why does dinner matter? Think about what happens at dinner. What happens at dinner is you connect over the day-to-day things that happen. You can model problem solving, you can discuss the issues, you have connection, you have intimacy, you can problem solve what's going on in your child's life. You can have that knowledge about what's going on in your child's life. You can model how to resolve conflict. You can model how to deal with stress at dinner. Adults, taking the time to engage in relationships matter. They can protect against the negative effects by being coaches, coaching children through problems, by role modeling positive behaviors, and by helping them problem solve. We looked at how relationships in this study with 28,000 youth across the country related to many different outcomes. We looked at how they related to physical health, healthy lifestyle, eating well, your weight. We looked at how it related to emotional health and positive behaviors, aggressive behaviors, substance use, risky behaviors like driving and drinking, getting in a car with someone who had been drinking, and academic achievement. What we found is that the quality of relationships with parents, over and above all of the other relationships, mattered for 23 out of 24 health outcomes. So it didn't matter whether we were talking about physical health, emotional health, social health, academic health. Parents matter, the quality of relationships. Teachers' relationships mattered for 8 out of 24, uniquely mattered for 8 out of 24 outcomes. Those outcomes were primarily related to academic achievement, that's the good news, positive physical health, and positive mental health. So relationships matter at school. School relationships, which meant there's an adult in the building who cares about me, who knows about me, that I could go to talk to about the things that are happening, mattered for 13 out of 24 outcomes. So it's not just about the teacher. It's about the relate in the classroom. It's about all of the adults in the buildings at school that provide a healthy and positive climate for children to feel safe and respected, and that can buffer against these outcomes. Peer relationships mattered for 14 out of 24 outcomes. Those were mostly related to substance use, risky behaviors, and aggression, as well as academic achievement. Neighborhood relationships mattered for 12 out of 24. That sense of community. There's someone in my neighborhood that I could go to talk to if I had a problem. If I needed help, I could knock on a neighbor's door. People in my neighborhood say hello and welcome me. So community connections are also extremely important. When we finished the study, we were really interested in how it had changed over time, and this study had been conducted in 2002, 2006, and then also in 2010-11. And what we found, which was, I think, really interesting, is relationships over time predicted more health outcomes. They protected against more negative outcomes, and they promoted more positive outcomes. So over time, relationships have mattered more. The concerning part is over time, fewer children are benefiting from those positive relationships. In other words, fewer children reported having a high quality relationship with parents, schools, teachers, and neighborhoods over time. Fewer children reported So they're not benefiting from those effects. The only one that remained steady over time was peer relationships. The proportion of children who reported positive peer relationships remained steady over time. So what has this done? This has really come to teach me about what we need to do in order to prevent bullying. You're probably sitting there thinking, I'm at a symposium about bullying, why am I talking so much about relationships? Because children and youth and parents and communities need to come together to form that healthy relationship supportive network so that we can help children develop healthy relationships and become and promote positive healthy relationships. At the basis of what's related to academic achievement is that we have engaged learners who feel safe at school and have the social, emotional relationship skills to be effective in their interactions. And I think about bullying as a relationship problem. When we think fundamentally what bullying is, it's where one child who has power and uses that negatively over another to harm and create distress. And over time, that child who has power becomes more and more powerful in that relationship. The child who's being victimized becomes less and less powerful in that relationship. They become more and more isolated from their peer group, they become more and more disenfranchised, and they become less and less able to right that power imbalance because of the negative impact. So bullying is fundamentally a relationship problem and a red flag for many other problems, many other relationship problems. Here's your second thing that, if you remember only one thing except my jokes, to take today is the second point is relationship problems require relationship solutions. When we address bullying, what is the thing that when we're providing that feedback to those involved that we want them to learn to be more effective, to engage in healthy and equitable relationships? Is it that we want them to learn how to apologize, to learn how to develop empathy for that child who's been victimized? Then the kinds of consequences that we put in place have to reflect those relationship skills in order to help them move on. Here's the most recent Canadian-wide data on the prevalence of bullying in Canada, and you can see again the trends over time. About 22% of students report being victimized at least once in the last week. About 12% of students report bullying others, and about 41% of children report engaging in both. That's 75%. 3/4 of the students in your classrooms are involved in bullying in some way. These are mutually exclusive categories. It's a significant problem. So we need to recognize that in order to address it, we have to begin early. Bullying is a red flag for many other problems. We had the privilege of following children for 8 years as they went through grade 5 to the end of high school in Ontario, which is when they would be about age 17. Children who bullied were much more likely to engage in dating aggression. 100% of those girls who were bullying in elementary school in grades 4, 5, or 6 went on to be physically aggressive in their first romantic relationship. 100%. By the time they were into high school, they became victimized in those relationships. It predicts involvement in gang relationship. Those who engaged in bullying regularly and frequency in elementary school, by the time they got to the equivalent of grade 9, which is around age 14, in where we conducted the study, they were about 9 times more likely to join a gang. By the time they were also, of those kids who bullied regularly and frequently in elementary school, 96% of them went on to engage and perpetrate sexual harassment. In other words, in bullying, they're learning how to use power and aggression negatively to harm their peers. They transfer that into their dating relationships. They transfer that into joining delinquent gangs. We've also done some work where we've looked at children who have been abused and their parents have a history of bullying when they were in elementary school. So not only are they doing it to their peers and their romantic partners, but they're at much higher risk for doing it to their children. We're currently investigating the link between early bullying and elder abuse, but we suspect that that also might exist. You have to see what I'm dealing with here. I have to move this along, and I'm not really, oh, here we go. Nope. So my point here is relationships matter, and there's a growing body of research that shows that bullying, violence, mental health and physical health problems, substance abuse, school dropout, and unemployment are all rooted in experiences within violent relationships, of which bullying can be considered to be one of them. So we know that bullying is related to many, engaging in bullying behaviors is related to many outcomes. Just to give you a sense of electronic or the cyberbullying that we've heard a lot of, I wanted to show you these data. And as you look at this graph, the solid lines are what we found in, 2005, and the dotted lines are what we found in the most recent study. And there's two things I want you to take away from this. This is the percentage of children who report being victimized. It's on average about 20%. What you find is girls engage in more cyberbullying than boys, but boys are catching up by grade 10. So initially it was quite different. In 2006 when we did it, it was a much more characterized behavior of girls than boys. But by the time we came back and visited those kids in 2010, we found that it was much more, the boys were starting to catch up to girls in terms of their levels of being victimized. Here's something else for you to think about in terms of your tools. We went and asked children what had happened to them online in the last 30 days. And we found that about 43% of them said they had received an email or an instant messaging. They had been made fun of in a chat room. They had something posted on a website that made them upset, or something posted online that they didn't want others to see, or they had been afraid to go to the computer. None of these children defined any of these behaviors that had happened repeatedly as bullying. The second thing for your toolbox is to start to think about how do we help children and youth identify what is bullying and what is not bullying, and how do we help them understand that? Because if they don't understand that basic, then they might be perpetrating the behavior and not realizing the impact. We also asked them separately about how harmful they perceived these different kinds of behaviors, and this we found quite interesting. The girls are in red, the boys are in blue. And electronic bullying was, we told them that 5 was the most painful experience that you could imagine experiencing. And we gave them other things to rate it against, like going to the dentist. That was my add-in. And what we found is that children rated electronic and verbal bullying as much more painful than physical bullying. So cyberbullying is viewed as more painful. And in our own research, what we find is cyberbullying, the unique effects associated with cyberbullying are over and above offline bullying. In other words, if you're at risk for being depressed, bullying offline is associated with an increased risk for being depressed. But if you're electronic bullied, it further increases your risk for being. And that's probably because of the context, the anonymity, the sense that it can get around quickly, that you don't know who's perpetrating it. In general, this is what they say happens online. The number one things is calling names and threats. So those are what they're saying. This is important to know who's doing the electronic bullying or the cyberbullying. And what you find is it doesn't matter the type. It's primarily friends or other students. So these are not strangers. It's about the relationships within the school and within the peer group. These are not, some are strangers, and it's most likely to be the sexual or sending pictures, but the majority of it is between friends or between other students. So it's happening around the relationships in our schools. Here's a study that we did with about 18,000 children, and we looked at the unique effects and the mental health implications of engaging in cyberbullying. And this is designed in the same way, that if you never did it, you rarely did it, sometimes or often, you were victimized. And as you go along the bottom, you can see the more frequently you were victimized by cyberbullying, the more likely you were to have negative effects, from binge drinking, drunkenness, prescription drug misuse, over-the-counter drug misuse, fighting, vandalism, really huge increase for anxiety and depression, self-harm, which included things like self-cutting, suicidal thoughts, and also suicide attempts. So cyberbullying is associated with these negative effects, both what we call the externalizing, that disruptive acting out behavior, as well as the internalizing behavior. For the toolbox, we have to think about how children respond to electronic bullying. The number one way that they respond is to do nothing. The number two way is to tell a friend. The number three way is to confront it. And the very last thing that they do is tell an adult, a parent. Youth don't have strategies to address bullying and victimization. We need to start the conversation about how to address bullying online and offline, because they don't have the strategies, or they have perceptions that the strategies are ineffective. We did a study where we looked at how often children reported being bullied and how it related to bullying down the road. And so what we found is that the more adults that a child told, the more likely the bullying was to stop within a year. Although children and youth's perceptions are, if I tell, it will get worse. So we as adults have to step up. We as adults have to be responsive to their concerns. We have to create that relationship quality that enables children and youth to tell us those things that are going on in their lives. Adults are definitely out of the loop. So over 50% of them who are victimized don't tell them, and they don't tell them because they're afraid of the technology being taken away. They're afraid, which is true. Now research has clearly shown that if you take away children's technology, it actually further isolates them over time. What do we need to do? Go back to the second thing that I told you I wanted you to learn. Relationship problems require relationship solutions. When our children don't do well in math, we don't take away their math book. What do? We put in the scaffolds and the supports to help them learn how to do math. We have to put it, and we monitor their math, and we support them in learning the math. That's what we need to do with cyberbullying and cyber victimization. We have to put in the supports to help them learn how to use the technology in a safe manner so that they can be effective and positive and respectful when they go online. We know that students are more likely to tell more parents than teachers, so teachers have to work on creating that atmosphere where they can tell and learn how to report. Okay, I'm at that move those pages thing again. Nope. Oh. This is the most stressful part about presenting, you need to know. So why is this so important? And why is this important? Usually when I talk about this issue, stress and brain development, you're thinking, oh my goodness, where are we going now? Well, relationships and the quality of relationships impact brain development. And we have to understand that if we're going to effectively deal with bullying. So when we have stress, and all of us can relate to having stress at some point. I had a little bit this morning before I presented. I'm good now. But what happens is you get shortness of breath, your heart races, sometimes your palms sweat, and you don't think as clearly, right? Well, what happens is if a child, and that affects your brain, that's all happening because of what's going on in your brain. And if a child has positive experiences, it actually has positive effect on their brain. It positively affects their ability to learn, to remember things, and to regulate their emotions. If they have many negative experiences or stressful experiences, it negatively affects their ability to to respond because they're in this heightened stress response. So as the brain develops and children get exposed to stress, it can affect how the brain is developed, and it can affect, it actually, your social experiences are what I call a social conversation with your brain. It actually can leave a chemical signature on genes, which can be temporary or permanent. We can never change our genes, but we can change how genes are expressed. So it helps. So when you're having these experiences that are highly stressful, and if it stays highly stressful over time, it actually influences which genes get turned on and off, and which genes get switched on and off. So we've done some research looking at how bullying as a stressful experience affects children's development. And what we find is that children have and everybody has a fundamental need to belong. We're wired to belong. When we put children in the fMRI machine and we take pictures of their brain, what we find is if you exclude children or children who have been highly victimized, we find that there's a reaction in their brain, in an area of the brain called the anterior cingulate cortex. This area of the brain, you don't have to remember anterior cingulate cortex, but this area of the brain is the same area of the brain that lights up when you experience physical pain. So in other words, when the experience at the brain level about being excluded or experiencing bullying or being highly victimized is the same at the brain level as being as experiencing physical pain. When we put children who have experienced peer victimization in there, we see a huge reaction in this area of the brain. We also see that when we show them pictures of being victimized or scenarios of bullying, we find that their reaction is very fast. When they see experiences of being victimized, the brain reacts in about 500 milliseconds. In other words, our brain processes, when we see an interaction of bullying, the processes it at the preconscious level. Before we can name what we see, it has an effect on the brain. And that's true for all children. It doesn't matter whether you have a bullying experience or a history of it or not. So I want you to think about when children go out on the playground at lunch and they see bullying. It's having an impact on their brain. Within 500 milliseconds, they're processing it. And for kids and students who are vulnerable, they're getting a reaction in this area of the brain that's associated with physical pain. They're starting to have a stress response. Now imagine them coming in after recess and you putting down the math test. They're not, remember what I said? Stress influences their ability to learn, to regulate their emotions and their memory. They're not going to do well on that math test. Even children who are bystanders have this reaction. We also put in children who defend and did the same protocol, and what we found is they also reacted in the anterior cingulate cortex. So it's not just vulnerable children, it's children who witness bullying. They have a reaction. What was different for those kids is it was much more temporary, so it faded away much faster than the children who were vulnerable and had a history of bullying, of being victimized. But the point is, when they go back into the classroom, after witnessing it or seeing it, they've had a reaction at the brain level. They can't sit down and do their math test. What do you need to do then? You need to calm them. You need to engage. This is for your toolbox. When children make transitions, especially from periods of time when there's little adult supervision and bullying is more likely to happen, like going out at recess, they need time to regroup, to calm down, before they can become ready to learn. So if we want children and youth to do their very best at school, we have to ensure that we put in that time where we might engage in a mindfulness practice, we might engage in self-calming practices after these transition times, and then their brains will be ready to learn. And in case you don't believe me, here's this is sort of an extreme example, but it shows you about how relationships matter. This is a picture of a brain of a 3-year-old child. The one on your far right is a child who had been extremely neglected. I could put up a similar slide for our children who had been victimized, although the effect wouldn't be as dramatic. On the left is a normal child's brain. Two things you should notice from this. One, the experiences, the social experiences affected brain development. The brain is smaller. The second thing that you should notice is that it's more transparent in the extreme neglect. What does that mean? It means that the neurons haven't made their connections where they can be efficient learners. Right? So one of the things that we do when we learn is that we make these connections, and the more and more we repeat these connections, then we get these networks of effect, but that really in our brains that represent effective ways or efficient ways of thinking. It affects the brain development. Children who are chronically victimized have similar kinds of issues. It affects the way that their brain develops, it affects the size of the brain, it affects the interconnections in the brain, and it's all because of this high stress response. We also know, remember I said experiences leave chemical signatures on genes. We also know that there was a recent study out of New Zealand that showed that when children witness 2 to 3 types of violence, domestic violence or child maltreatment or frequent bullying, it was related to premature aging by the telomeres. Telomeres are like little mushroom caps on the tops. And what happens is as we age, they get looser and looser. And how loose telomeres are a good indicator of how old we are. What we find is that telomere erosion is much more likely. So those children are like premature aging if they've experienced 2 out of 3 of those types of violence. And it's related to having prolonged high levels of stress. Children who are frequently victimized are constantly ramped up in this high levels of stress. We now know that their stress response is actually what accounts for some of their poor academic outcomes, that heightened brain stress response mediates that relationship between them. So what I want you to have a sense of here is relationships matter. If a child experiences relationships adversity, they go into this heightened stress response. It impacts how our genes are related. It impacts how our brain develops. And then that's what leads to the physical and mental health problems. So relationships really, really matter. And our children and youth aren't experiencing a very low percentage of them is experiencing high quality relationships. And we have to do much, much more. Now, I might have depressed you a bit, but I'm going to tell you the good news. The good news is it can be repaired. And now I'm going to move on to the tools and what we can do about it. There's lots of evidence that shows relationship-based interventions can actually decrease the stress response. It can mitigate against those negative effects. And they've shown these relationship-based interventions, they've shown them with younger children, they've shown the positive effects with adolescents, and they've shown them on a variety of physical and mental health outcomes. So it's a good news story. The earlier we do the relationship-based interventions, the better it is, the better the outcomes, but they still can make a difference even in early adolescence. So we're going to talk a bit about how bullying and relationship-based outcomes should be in your, relationship-based interventions should be in your toolbox. But I'm going to take a little step back. I'm going to start by talking about, I think one of the things that happens is we think that if we put in a bullying prevention, like a relationship-based intervention, it's going to make all the difference. It does make a difference, but it's not enough. The way that I think about children and youth at school is they go to school 25 hours a day, 25 hours a week. Not 25 hours a day. That would be a bad math problem. That would be the stress response kicking in. But they go to school 25 hours a week, approximately. If we spend 1 hour a week doing bullying prevention in our class, that's great. That's going to make a difference. But they're also learning about relationships in the other 24 hours that happen at school. And those experiences matter. So what we do as adults matters in those other 24 hours. And that's going to make a huge impact in terms of creating the quality of relationships and decreasing bullying and victimization. So the first hurdle that we have as adults is we're not very good at recognizing bullying. When we look at it, we're really good at recognizing that direct things like physical bullying or verbal insults. Those jump out at us. But we don't see the more subtle forms like that exclusion, those keeping children out of groups, the rumor spreading. And we also take that type of bullying less seriously. What I can tell you is on the impact on the brain, remember two things. That exclusion, that cyberbullying, that indirect bullying has a greater response at the stress level. So it's having a greater impact. And children and youth are saying it's more painful. We have to be able to recognize, we have to start the discussion. One of the ways that we recognize it in our classrooms is understanding the dynamics. There was a great Huffington Post article by a teacher or by a parent describing it, and I think this captures how we as adults can be aware of relationships in classrooms. This parent went in for help to find out. I can totally relate to this. The parent went in to talk to the teacher about how she was teaching the new math because she didn't get it. And they start to talk about the relationships or what the teacher did in the classroom. And what the teacher said, well, every Friday I ask students who they want to sit beside for the following week. And the students know that I'm not going to actually let everybody sit beside who they want. And so the parent said, well, why do you do that exercise? What's that exercise about? And she said, the exercise is about so I know who's excluded. So I know who I have to surround with positive relationships in my classroom. So I can make sure that everybody in my classroom feels included. A really simple exercise, my fourth tool, if you're counting, that you can do as an educator to be aware of the relationships, to recognize the different forms of bullying, to recognize the groups that exist in the classroom. You know, as a parent, I do a lot of parent talks as well, and I always tell parents never say what not to do. And same thing to educators. You never say, don't run, because what does the student hear as they're running down the hall? Run. So I'm still going to tell you what not to do. This is what we know in the research doesn't work. One of the challenges for educators is to find strategies that work. This doesn't work. Zero tolerance, punitive practices. Why wouldn't it work? Think about what I've been telling you. What are children learning about relationships with zero tolerance? They're not learning how to be different. They're not learning how to engage effectively. They're not learning how to use their power positively. They're not learning respect. They're just learning, if I do this, I get punished. That's not helping them move forward. So we can have consequences, but we want to make sure they're educated of consequences. The second thing that our most common response to dealing with cyberbullying is to say, avoid social media. We can't do that. This is the new way, this is the new world of the way that they communicate with one another. We did a study and we were really interested in looking at, you know, the quality of relationships online. And so we got a group of students, and believe it or not, they agreed to this, that would let us get their messages before they got them, and we coded the messages. We were overwhelmed with the number of messages that we had. We had about 200 students in the study, and we were getting over 5,000 messages a day. So this is the way they communicate. If you take away their social media, you're going to take away their social connections, and relationships matter. Third, addressing bullying with celebrity, not expertise. Celebrities bring heightened awareness. If you bring them into your school, that's okay, but know what that's going to achieve. That's going to heighten awareness about that issue for that day. What I'm going to ask you is, what are you going to do tomorrow and next week and the following week and the next month to follow up on that heightened awareness? A one-time event is not going to prevent bullying. It's only going to heighten awareness. But I know you're going to remember everything I said after this one-time event. One-time interventions, the same problem. Bullying is a relationship problem that requires ongoing relationship work. Relationships are really, really hard. You don't just have a good day and you're good in the relationship for life. Ask anybody who's married. You have to keep working at it day after day. Children have to keep working at it. And we have to think about it in terms of also we as role models about relationships. If you have bullying in your school or poor staff relationships, then if you ignore that, then you're not going to deal with the bullying. Because relationships, the adults in the schools are role models and coaches, and if they're yelling and not being positive and supportive and respectful, then the children aren't going to do it. So you absolutely have to deal with those relationships. How do you find a program? So you got to work on relationships, but you also need to have a program. We know that programs that work and what match onto what educators pick are universal. They're for everybody in the school. Everybody can benefit from learning how to be better in relationships. They're comprehensive, that is that they have a part that works with the parents, they have a part that works with the community, they have a part that works with the classroom, with the whole school, and with the individual. And programs that are more successful are integrated into the curriculum. It shouldn't be a one-off. It has to be about how we do everything. When we're talking about history, we can talk about what was disrespectful, how was power abused, what was the impact of an abuse of power. In the novels that we read in English, we can integrate these same concepts. Those are good choices. Educators also, though, tend to pick programs that are simple, that are recommended by a colleague, not necessarily evidence-based, that don't take time to implement, that take little time for training, or are free. The things that are not in green are not good reasons to pick a program. Those are not related to positive outcomes. Ones that are related to positive outcomes are they're universal, they're comprehensive, and they're integrated. Recent reviews have been done, and we're not very successful at bullying prevention. On average, bullying, and if you look across all the studies, those meta-analyses again, we reduce bullying by about 20 to 23%. Not good enough. And it's not good enough because there are 75% of our students are involved in bullying. Why are we having such small effects? Because it's more than the program. It's about the relationships. We do know, though, if you are going to have a program, these were the pieces that were related. Parent training, essential. You know, if you think about it, the school and the parents have to be on the same page. If you and your spouse aren't on the same page, you're not very effective parents. It's the same thing. You and the schools need to be on the same page. You need to communicate to the school, to the parents about what you're doing. Increased supervision, more supervisors, less bullying. I want to give you an example. We've actually been running this for almost 17 years in Kingston, and these are different kinds of things that show you about how you can increase playground supervision and involve communities. A local school I was working with was right beside a seniors home, and the seniors wanted to support the school. So they said, we want to come and hang out on the playground and meet kids and increase your supervision because we know that will help. And the school said, okay, but you can't have any power, you can't discipline kids, and if there's a problem, you could just have to tell adults because of union rules. And the seniors said, okay, good. And they had one senior who was an engineer, and he actually divided the school ground into quadrants, and every senior stood in a quadrant in the school ground. He was also in the Army. And what happened over the year of the program was bullying and victimization went down and the quality of relationships went up. Why? Because of supervision increased. Because children on playgrounds go to the same spot. They formed relationships. When something happened, they could get the teacher. Now, because this was seniors, of course, it was seasonal. But what happened over time is in the winter, the students went to visit the seniors at lunch. And they created a community relationship of support. 17 years later, that program exists in that school, and that seniors home has taken on 3 different programs. Many other benefits. They had to learn about life and dying. They had to learn about aging. They had to learn about respect. A really creative, easy solution, free. It's not about a bullying program. It's about creating relationships. Disciplinary methods, and that means that they have to be learning, educative, having school conferences, meeting one-on-one with parents and children who are involved. videos and information going to parents, classroom rules and classroom management, working with the peers. You know, peers are watching bullying. 85% of peers are present during bullying. We now know through our fMRI work, taking pictures of their brains, it's affecting their brains, that they also have the stress response. And cooperative group work matters. Oh, I'm getting way past my time. I can feel it. I'm just trying to move the...
Can you give one or two examples of the disciplinary methods? Because you raised them.
Oh, okay. So discipline measure, the question was, can I give one or two examples of disciplinary methods? And that's about educative solutions. So, you know, rather than have a child who's bullied come and stay inside or during recess or lunch or be isolated, when they stay inside, have them write a letter of apology. Have them write what the impact of being bullied was. Have them plan to go to a younger classroom and talk about what you can do to prevent bullying. Have them start to plan and be a leader in a bullying prevention initiative. Create cognitive dissonance. Create an opportunity for them to learn the skills that they don't know, and create an opportunity for them to show their leadership in a positive way. Sorry, I'm getting stuck on this again. Okay. I'm getting close. Sorry. Okay. So the other thing, and I've said this before, is that we did a research looking at whether you had a bullying prevention program or not, and I said they are important. That the majority of programs out there are successful at reducing bullying, but some programs aren't. About 15%, 1 in 7 aren't. So my advice to you is make sure there's empirical evidence that your program is working. Assess your program. The same program isn't effective in every school because it depends on the culture and the needs of your particular school. So pick a climate that makes sense for your school. Pick a program that makes sense for your school. Having a program is better than not. We looked at schools who didn't have programs, and the bullying just kept getting worse and worse over time. So having a program does matter. What matters, or what made schools the most successful in our review, was the moment-to-moment. It's not just about the program, but it's how they applied the principles of the program in the moment-to-moment. And it also was about the significance of adult and student leadership. Children and youth know about bullying, where it happens, what's going on. We have to respect their knowledge as experts. They know more about technology. They don't view us as having credible information about technology. Let them lead the initiatives, but they're going to need adult support. Monitoring and following up. How often has your spouse or your child ever done something the first time you asked them and kept on doing it? Life doesn't work like that. Children need to be coached and they need to be supported to keep going on and doing it. And parent involvement is absolutely critical. So, in your toolbox, what is really successful bullying prevention about? Successful bullying prevention is, I know you're going to be surprised, is about relationships. It's about the moment-to-moment interactions and how you coach and support children in developing relationships. We need to stop and identify and praise and reinforce the positive interactions. We have to think about, what are we reinforcing? When we put remote microphones on children, we found that aggressive children in the classroom interacted with the teacher about once every 2 minutes. Non-aggressive children interacted with the teacher about once every 30 minutes. Who's learning more, and who's learning more about how to get attention? Make sure you deliver that attention to the behaviors you want to see as much as the behaviors that you want to end. And remember, and you are educators, but people don't learn the first time, and they need to learn over and over and over again. There's a whole research literature on instructional learning, and I haven't really done a very good role modeling of it today, but 5% of learners will transfer a new skill into practice as a result of learning theory. Only 5% of you are going to remember what I told you today. 10% of them are going to transfer a new skill into practice as a result of learning and seeing it being demonstrated. Maybe 10% of you will learn, because I think I've been polite and respectful. 20% of learners will transfer a new skill into practice as a result of theory, demonstration, and practice. So to increase my odds, I need you to interact with one another all day and practice the kinds of behaviors we've talked about. 25% of learners transfer new skill as a result of theory, demonstration, practice, and corrective feedback. Children and youth need corrective feedback. 90% of learners will learn how to be respectful, how to have healthy relationships as a result of theory, demonstration, practice, and embedded coaching, when we're with them in the moment, supporting them being different. So for children, you want them to learn healthy relationships. Break it down into small tasks. Provide many opportunities to practice, and understand that they're going to learn their best when they're motivated and they feel cared about in it. They need constant reinforcement. They need firm but warm support when they struggle. It's always finding that balance. Relationships are extremely complicated to teach. Think about it. On the same day, I'll think about it this way, that I could come home from work, I could have had a stressful day. I may walk through my door, and my child may ask me something, and I may not be the parent that I want to be, and maybe snappy or short and say, yes, fine, whatever. On another day, I come home from work, and I've had a great day, and they ask me that question, that sounds like a great idea. Let's do that. How can I support you doing that? I am the same person behaving differently under the same conditions. But I've had a bad day versus a good day. Relationships are really complex. Children and youth have to navigate that. The same person could be different in their responses to the same response. Different people in their worlds respond differently. These are really complex skills, and learning about relationships is a lifelong journey that's going to require lots of support, monitoring, and following up. So at the end of the day, we need to focus on how can we build their relationship skills, how can we increase social awareness, how can we teach them to manage their emotions and their behaviors, what are the relation skills and responsible decision making in those moments. These are about relationships. So bullying, these are the 3 things that I want you to remember. 1, relationships matter. 2, bullying is a relationship problem, and by dealing with bullying early, we can make a difference. 3, how am I teaching effective relationship skills to children that I'm interacting with and working with when I'm those other 24 hours, other than when I'm interacting with them? And how am I reinforcing the 1-hour bullying prevention talk that I'm giving? If we all focus on promoting healthy relationships, we can make our schools safe and respectful for our children. Thank you.